Hey, nice to have you with us. Friday, the weekend is upon us, and being a Friday, that's when we talk property here on Mansfield Today. Nice to have you with us. As I said, we're gonna cover this from a slightly different angle on property this week, because we're joined via Zoom by the Chief Executive of TPN, Michelle Dickens, looking at the escalating charges that we are being faced with and are facing across a broad spectrum as property owners and also as renters as well. The entire country being squeezed through various means to get money out of property owners. Let's take a look at that. Michelle, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. It's not a nice subject to have to discuss, but people are already starting to feel the effects of Eskom increases, municipal charges, your water, all the rest of it. Let's go through those and just look at the various escalations that we are facing at the moment.
So I guess ultimately property becomes more and more expensive, and whether you're a tenant and you're renting someone else's property, or whether you own your own property, there are escalating charges. For tenants, some of these charges do get passed on to them. So historically, in the past, you used to rent out a property and sewage, refuse, water, even to an extent in bygone days, used to be part of and included as part of your rent. And over the years, what we've seen that these charges have been passed on to the tenant. So now, tenant, you're paying all your usage costs. You're paying the refuse costs on the property. You're paying the sewage costs on the property. You're paying the water. You're paying the electricity. And as these costs go up, often landlords have included in their lease agreements that should these costs go up, that the tenant is then liable for those additional charges. And over the years, what we've seen that the charges haven't always been double-digit increases for all of the charges. It's kind of been 1 year, it's been electricity, we're sitting at a 15% increase. The 1 year it was water at a 19% increase. Sewage was the 1 year. So you'll see that it stretches the budget because every year something's increasing at really high rates for the consumer.
This means two things, really. It means that there is more consumer debt on one side, and on the other side, because there's more consumer debt, there's less disposable income. Just take us through the effects of those two aspects of this equation.
Well, I think what's happening is that consumers their incomes aren't keeping up with expenses. And so consumers are ultimately becoming poorer and poorer every year. Our rands just don't extend to what they used to. And so what often happens is that tenants need to start cutting back. Housing is a big part of consumers' budgets. 30% of a consumer's income will typically go towards housing, and that doesn't matter whether it is the house that you own, the bond that you're paying off, or whether it is the rent that you are paying. The rent that you're paying, though, is not simply the basic rental charge. And so for a landlord, what landlords have seen happen over the years, unfold over the years, is that the ultimate end total amount that the tenant is paying is increasing. But it's simply for the landlord to collect those additional charges, those electricity, the water, the sewage, the refuse, etc., and pass those on to council, as the basic rent has not kept up with the inflation. And in fact, what we're seeing at the moment is we're seeing that rent is actually a negative escalation territory. That's good news, right? So as a tenant, you're paying less for the rent that you were paying a year ago. As I said, it's not the total expense. The total expense is you're still paying more because you've got those additional charges that you need to pay at the end of the month.
And then the other side of the equation is the fact that there's less disposable income, which doesn't augur well for the economy, does it?
No, not at all. And not just less disposable income, but we've got less people employed that we had a year ago. 1.4 million people without jobs, without earnings than what we had a year ago. And sure, that's an improvement. I mean, at the peak of the lockdown, we had 2.2 million job losses. And so we have had recovery, and we must be grateful for that recovery. But it's very difficult to get back to where you were once your earnings are lost, and it's difficult to recover those earnings and get back on your feet in terms of the commitments that you do have. And so what we've seen consolidation leading up to this point. We have a growing population, but we also had a growing number of households in South Africa. In other words, we had smaller households as our household size was growing. What we've had now, though, is we've had a consolidation as people move back with family and friends and consolidate their households to try and consolidate expenses, particularly from a housing perspective.
Michelle, the one thing that I think is irritating the vast majority of South Africans at this stage, though, is the delivery aspect. Whether it's Eskom breakdowns due to non-maintenance, or whether it's municipalities not delivering on services. I mean, what was it, 2018, 2019, I think there were only about 20 of the 280 odd municipalities in the country that got clean audits from the Auditor General, and municipalities owing massive amounts of money that aren't being paid over to people like Eskom or the Rand Waters of the world, and this growing sense of discontentment because I'm paying what I'm supposed to be paying, but what am I actually getting back for it? Am I getting bang for my buck? No.
Absolutely. And so what's very worrying actually is that as we start, so we've got Eskom, and we know that we go through these waves of load shedding. And to a certain extent, businesses have put together generators or the opportunity to keep the businesses going, the businesses afloat, trading, so to speak, during these waves of blackouts, of load shedding. Next, maybe water. And I know that we've had, in the last week, we've had a Rand water issue. And so areas like Tshwane, like Sandton, have had issues with regards to water. And so the concern is, of course, if the systems, if the infrastructure starts to fail, certainly from a water perspective, as it has in many outlying areas. So not just in the main Sandton, Tshwane, Gauteng type areas. If that permeates and starts to become a systemic problem, what does that mean? Not just for households, but for businesses as well. And the concern then is, what is required then for businesses to keep the lights on, to keep the water going, to keep businesses transacting. And it's not just manufacturing business. You look at places like Clover in the Northwest, who have moved one of their factories from the Northwest to KwaZulu-Natal. that's an outlying area. When it starts to happen in your main central districts, that's when it starts to become a concern and a worry.
It's also the lady who makes homemade breads at home, sitting without Eskom. She can't operate her little business that brings in a trickle of money to help the family out to get through the month. So it's a wide-ranging effect, which a lot of municipalities are tending. I see I'm not sure if I'm right here, but there seems to be a trend developing here where municipalities are saying they're finding it difficult to deliver on services because of COVID-19. But quite frankly, I can't see how things like inaccurate billing can be attributed to COVID-19.
Jeremy, I mean, you're 100%. So some of the frustrations with dealing with municipalities is not just the inaccurate billing, getting your account resolved, but then getting the backdated billing corrected as well. So there's often twofold issues. One is the billing is incorrect, getting that resolved, but then municipality often backdates 18 months, 2 years worth of incorrect billing as well, which also needs to be resolved. And this takes time, particularly when municipalities are finding it difficult to remain open during the COVID waves at the moment. So that is an additional frustration. But I think COVID was just a catalyst because these issues preceded the pandemic.
What advice, if any, because it's a rock and a hard place that we're stuck in, can you give to property owners through this particular period? And what do they need to do? Because it almost seems as though us as property owners or renters have to be proactive in this, otherwise nothing's going to be done.
Vigilant. So first is to ensure that you receive your municipal account and to peruse it and ensure its accuracy. There's a couple of things. One is to ensure that you are being billed at the correct tariff. So are you on the correct residential tariff? I've seen accounts that have gone from residential to agricultural to vacant and backdated 18 months during that process. So absolutely to make sure that you're being billed at the correct tariff, to ensure that you're being billed at the correct valuation. And when the valuation roll round, as they do, to put in your objections, to make sure that you continue to be valued at the correct value. To look at your estimate. So if you're being charged an estimate amount, to submit those meter readings. So there is a way that you can either to Eskom direct or to your municipality to ensure that you're submitting your meter readings. And that way you can ensure that the accuracy of your account is maintained. And then, of course, if you are going out and looking for property at the moment, particularly if you're looking at it from an investment perspective, is to understand what these additional charges are that you would be liable for. So whether it's your municipal charges or your levy charges, whatever these additional charges are, that you're aware of them and that you are calculating your return on your property investment very carefully, because right now, in the old days, it was really easy to buy a property, to turn it over in a couple of years, make 30% and bought your uncle and buy the next property, roll it over again. The last 10 to 12 years, property values have been very, very flat. Barring the Western Cape, of course, property prices have been really, really flat. So it's been very difficult to make your capital appreciation. And so if you are buying from a buy-to-let perspective, then it's about your income generation on your monthly rental. And if that's the goal, then you know, understanding the expenses of the property becomes really, really important in this kind of financial climate at the moment.
I fear we have just touched the tip of the iceberg on this particular one, but thank you very much for the input that you have had into the show. The buy-to-let aspect is another one that we should touch on fairly soon on the property show, because we were talking just last week or the week before to I've gone absolutely blank, and I was at school with him. He's going to slap me next time he sees me. Andrew Golding, I beg your pardon, from Pam Golding Properties, who was just saying that the amount of first-time buyers is increasing at this stage because of interest rates and property prices as well. So that buy-to-let area is going to possibly open up quite radically, and maybe something, if you don't mind, that we could touch on at a later stage with you.
Be amazing. Thank you. Yes.
Michelle Kruger from TPN, thank you very much for joining us on Mansfield today. That's all we've got the time for this on this property show on this Friday. Tomorrow I'll be back with Samantha Cowan talking about whatever Samantha Cowan wants to talk about, because that's what usually happens. Until then, cherry bye.